I only have one screen this time, but I also have speaker notes. Oh wait, this way you still see speaker notes. Let me try sharing again. No. Okay, I guess. Oh, wait, sorry. Let me just bring up the notes on my phone instead. Okay, just give me 1 minute. Okay, so welcome to our second lesson of uh, IT and IT ethics. Today we're going to look at requirement specification. Okay, so this is going to cover assessment criteria 1.3, which is to produce a specification of requirements for an application that meets the brief. Okay, what does this mean? Okay, before we get into the lesson, when we talk about requirements, right, it's for an application. This means what expectations do people have for an application, a software, even network, whatever it is that you're developing? Okay. Uh, let me, okay, I can't seem to bring up my notes. I'll have to make do. Okay. So, uh, yeah. So when you're making an application, right, most of the time you'll be hired to make an application. Okay. Rarely will you be making it out of your own interest, at least when it's for money. Okay. And when someone hires you to make an application or a website or a system, they have certain expectations, right? You shouldn't just get your client to say, okay, I want a website that helps me book hotels. Okay, I know booking.com exists, but let's just say it's a novel idea. I want a website that books hotels. You don't assume that, okay, uh, I'll put a logo here, I'll put a banner here, I'll put text here. No, you have to contact the client and you have to discuss with them. Okay. Uh, what features do you want the booking website? Do you want it just for hotels? Do you want it uh, for cars as well from the airport to the hotel? Do you want facilities to be rented? All that stuff, right? You want to understand how everything will work so that you can provide a system that will satisfy them. Okay. So how do you get those requirements and how do you express those requirements to your client to make sure you're both on the same page? Okay. And not just your client, also your internal team. Okay. If you're working with other people to develop the system, you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Okay. So let's go into some definitions. Let me try that one more time. So, Okay, so what is requirements specification? Okay, requirements specification, you're specifying requirements. Okay, sounds obvious, but just to make it clear, requirement specification is the process in which you write down what the user and the system will need. Okay, like I just explained. So this will apply to every project you work on. Okay, web development, uh, system development, network development. Okay, so in the requirements specification, you have two types of requirements. Okay, you have the functional requirements and the non-functional requirements. The functional requirements, uh, okay, both of these help uh, other users, people like your clients, people like maybe the users, right? When you're developing a system, you should also interview the people who will end up using the system. Okay, so it will help even them understand uh, how the system will work, even though they have no knowledge. Okay. Mm, hold on. Okay, there. Okay, I have my notes now. Okay, so requirement specification can also be called a software system specification, system requirement specification, functional requirements, business requirements, functional design, and all these names basically refer to the same thing. Okay, there might be minor differences, but generally it's referring to the same thing. Okay, so okay, what's the difference between functional and non-functional? Okay, functional requirements uh, refer to specific functions that the system will have. Okay, another word for that would be features. Okay, if for example, if you have uh, credit card transactions on your system, okay, or on your website, the system's ability to encrypt the credit card information, that's a functional requirement. Okay, this is more on the security side. Another functional requirement could be the ability to browse a list of hotels. Okay. Then non-functional requirement is a constraint. Okay. Limitations or requirements that are not really features, right? Not something that people actively do. It's just a characteristic of the system. Okay. That is linked to functional requirements, but isn't a functional requirement itself. Okay. This is an example of a requirement. We're going to cover it later, okay? But generally, you have an ID to specifically identify a requirement. This makes it easier to communicate with the team, for example. And then what is that requirement for? Okay, so this requirement says that the system will not disclose personal information without consent. Okay, and then who in the team is working on this, which version it's on, release date, keywords. Okay, not all of these are required, but for easier communication, yeah, people will have them all. Okay, uh, just so I know, can you see my laser pointer? I'm not sure if you'll be able to with a single screen. Okay, well, I hope you can see it. Okay, and then you have legal compliance, which is since this is more of a legal requirement for the system, it's not really something requested by uh, client, right? I don't think this is something that they'll think of suggesting. Then you can, if you want, list some laws that can be applied. Okay. And then a detailed description, okay, of how exactly it works. Don't The thing about requirements is that you should never assume that people will know what you're talking about. Yeah. So where do you get your requirements? Okay. Uh, the act of collecting requirements for your system is called requirement elicitation. Okay. So you collect your requirements from your stakeholders. Okay. From your stakeholders. Stakeholders is anyone who is interested in the success of your system. Okay, so of course that your main stakeholder is always your client. Okay, the people who are hiring you to develop a system, but there's other stakeholders as well. Investors can be stakeholders because their money relies on the success of your system. Uh, the end users, the people who will end up using your system, those are also your stakeholders. They would want a successful system in that it's comfortable to use, it works smoothly, and all of that. Uh, their happiness relies on the success of your system to a degree, right? So these are the people that you collect your requirements from. Okay, so you'll be conducting interviews, you'll have case studies. Okay, interviews, this could be, it's usually one-on-one. You can have uh, structured interviews or semi-structured or unstructured. Okay, this means that in structured interviews you have a fixed list of questions and the person answers those questions. That's it. You don't go into too much detail. You don't go off topic. Okay, with semi-structured, okay, we'll go with non-structured first. In non-structured, zero preparation. Maybe you ask a starting question and then see, depending on the replies, where you go in the conversation. But with semi-structured, which is the most popular option, you have a list of questions, and then depending on the interviewee's answers, you go certain directions, right? Maybe going a little bit deeper before moving on to the next question. Okay. Case studies is when you have maybe a scenario and then uh, a group of people discussing that scenario. Okay. How would you respond if the website does this, right? Stuff like that. Focus groups is another group uh, discussion. Okay. You have a moderator and he gives the group a specific topic, right? And then the group discusses regarding that topic, and uh, the moderator just takes down all the notes he can. The moderator might step in if things get too heated. Sometimes things can get heated in focus groups, but they themselves do not contribute anything to the conversation. They just let it flow naturally. Okay. Uh, okay, case studies is also when you look at past examples, okay? Have similar systems been developed before? And how were those, what were the requirements for those systems? What did they do to tackle specific issues? All that, okay? Then surveys and questionnaires is also another popular option. This is, I'm sure you're familiar, you create an online form or a physical survey and distribute it to as many people as you can to get a response, okay? Of course, you don't want just anyone to be replying to the survey. You want people who will end up being your end users, right? So if for example, you're developing a system for a school, right? A school management system, you want your respondees to be teachers and students, right? You don't need a businessman to be responding to your questions about school, okay? And then general observation. This is when you go into the field and see how things work, right? Going back to school management system, if you want to carry out observation, you go to the school with permission, of course. You go to the school and maybe you follow around the school administrator, see what their daily tasks are, how they do it, to see if there's any way that you can improve it in your online school management system. Okay. And then you have literature review. Okay, so all of these activities let you collect requirements from the stakeholders themselves. Okay, then in literature review, you look at basically text documents to find out how things were done in the past and how you can uh, take inspiration or improve on what was done already. Okay, so you can look at contracts, you can look at standards, online standards, what general requirements are, and what your system should be able to do. This also includes laws. So, like the example that we just looked at, this one, right? This one, I don't think your stakeholders, your clients are going to tell you that I want you to encrypt credit card information when you're storing it, right? Your client won't think of such things. It's your job as the developer to make sure that the system is following the law, right? So a lot of countries, they have laws to protect customer data. You're required to encrypt data. If you don't, you you as the developer and the stakeholder, the client, can be fined depending on the law, of course. Okay, so things like HIPAA, well, that one is more health related, but the General Data Protection Act for the UK, I think that's from 2010, that requires you to keep all client data, all user data confidential. Okay. You can also look at newspapers, uh, also textbooks. A lot of uh, developers, they create developer logs of how they developed the system, what challenges they faced, how they tackle those challenges. So this can help you plan for when you end up developing as well. Okay. Now, requirement elicitation. Okay, let's go deeper into interviews. Okay, an interview is an in-depth discussion about the stakeholder's need. Okay, stakeholder again isn't necessarily your end user. It can also be investors. It can also be the person who is hiring you. Okay, of course, you don't really need to interview investors. You just need to make sure that the system is successful enough to earn money. Okay. But end users and the client who is hiring you are the most popular people to go for when you want to conduct interviews. Okay. But more towards end users. Okay. Uh, so in an interview, you get what we call a qualitative response. Okay. When you're conducting interviews and surveys, you get one of two types of responses. You either get a quantitative response or a qualitative response. Okay. A quantitative response, when you're summarizing your findings, okay, you can basically categorize everything into numbers. Okay. For example, uh, if you have a question in your survey that says, what operating system do you use? And then you have a list of options, right? People don't simply type, you have a list of options for them that they select from Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, and then others, okay? And then people select. When you're analyzing your data, when you're presenting your findings, you can say 70% of users use Windows, 20% of users use Apple, 5% use Linux, 5% use others, right? That's a quantitative response, okay? Uh, a qualitative, on the other hand, usually comes from interviews where you can't really categorize. Okay, maybe you can categorize in the sense of this is a positive response, this is a negative response, but most of the time, there's too much in there for you to turn into numbers, right? You can provide a general feeling that people have towards something, but you can't turn it into numbers. Okay. So interviews let you get qualitative response. Okay, a good research will have uh, a good balance of qualitative and quantitative. But when you want to go in depth, interviews is your go-to. Okay, because you can adapt your questions and follow up based on responses. Okay, if you ask a question and the person answers, you can go into more detail. Why do you say that? What do you mean by this? And be as clear as possible, right? That's the whole purpose of requirement elicitation. Okay, clarify unclear requirements directly from the stakeholder. You're already interviewing them, right? Uh, might as well find out as much as you can, right? This will reduce you having to schedule more meetings in the future when you're developing. Okay. Uh, the interviews are also a collaborative effort. So if you interview your stakeholder, your client, they'll know that you're being as detailed as possible. You're going to find out exactly what needs to happen, right? If you're interviewing end users, you can build up their expectations so that they know that, okay, the person is it knows what exactly I want. They're going to try to give me what I want. Okay. The problem with interviews, though, is that they are time consuming, right? You have to schedule the interview and you have to go in as detailed as possible. So a 5-10 minute interview probably isn't enough. Okay. If you want as much detail as possible, it could be 30 minutes to an hour. You never know. Okay. There might also be interviewer bias. Okay. Remember, whenever you're developing a system, you already have your own assumptions, right? You need to try your best to get rid of those, okay? Because sometimes you hear an answer and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'll do it like this. And you don't care to ask the client or whoever you're interviewing if that's actually what they mean, okay? Of course, this is a lighter example of interviewer bias. There can be times where what the requirements are conflict with what you want to do. Okay. Requires resources for scheduling, conducting, and transcribing. That also feeds into the fact that it's time consuming. And it's also limited by how many stakeholders you can interview, right? Because it's so time consuming and interviews don't really give you quantitative data. You still need to conduct other research on top of that, right? You shouldn't rely purely on data collection. You should also do literature reviews. Okay, everything needs to be balanced. So interviews take time. Okay, um, especially since you're doing one at a time, and ideally 30 minutes to an hour of interviews. So depending on how big your system is, maybe 5 people won't even be enough, and that's 5 hours, right? And you don't want to interview the same type of person again and again. You want to interview different types of users. So the more types of users you have, the more types of interviews you need to conduct, right? Questions you need to prepare. Okay, so that's interviews. Then we have case studies. Okay, case studies is when you look at real world examples uh, of systems that have been developed, of problems that have been faced, and you take lessons from that. Okay, so using case studies lets you know what the best practices are. Okay, this is how people usually do things. This is how you should probably do things. Okay, you're not tied down to those methods, but it's something that can make your process smoother. Okay, what challenges were faced, what solutions were used to face those challenges. Okay, and its problem is it's not always applicable to what you are going to develop, okay? Because a lot of times what you're developing is brand new, okay? It's either something that has never been done before, or even if it has been done before, it when you're going to do it, it's a bit more specific to your context. Okay. For example, school development systems have been developed before, right? There are online school management systems that other people have developed. So you're not making something new in that case, but you might be making something that's very specific to the school that is going to use your system. Okay, if a school is hiring you to create a school management system, you have to look at their registration methods. You can't just read online how other schools do their management, right? You have to look at this specific school, and it might be completely different from what you usually do. Okay, so case studies might not directly apply, okay, to the project or the requirements, but there's always lessons in there. It doesn't mean you don't do case studies at all. Okay, and it can be challenging to find the right case studies. Okay, when I was doing my final year project, this was a huge problem. Okay, because my case study was very specific. And then because the case study doesn't tell you what you should be thinking, it's up to you to interpret what this means, right? Was this a challenge that I'll face? Is this something that I need to do, or is it a best practice? Things like that. Okay. And since it's subject to interpretation, again, there is risk of bias. Okay. Any questions so far? Is everything all good? Okay. So we'll move on to the next. Next, let me bring up my notes again. Okay. The next way of getting your requirements, which is focus groups. Okay. Focus groups is when you have a group of people, okay, could be end users, could be your clients, could be just stakeholders in general, okay? And you have a topic that they discuss, you have a moderator who makes sure everyone is on track, but doesn't really contribute to the conversations, okay? And as they're discussing, you usually have focus groups of at least 5 people, can be up to 20 people, okay? But you don't want too many people, okay? So you'll have a variety of people. So you have many people thinking of the same problem, right? Two minds is better than one, 5 minds is better than two, 20 minds is better than five, okay? You get varying perspectives. Everyone is thinking from a different angle. So you cover more ground, okay? And this also encourages brainstorming because everyone is coming up with ideas, okay? And then they'll all discuss, reach a shared decision, a consensus, and understand one another. Okay. Uh, and this is also more efficient than interviews because in interviews you're doing one-on-one, right? But in focus groups, you're tackling many stakeholders at the same time. So in that sense, it's more efficient. The problem with focus groups is because it's a group discussion, and people don't really know one another. And the moderator is there, but he's not really part of the discussion. Okay. When the stakeholders are discussing, they're supposed to pretend that the moderator doesn't exist. Okay. He only steps in if things are going off topic or if things are getting too heated. Okay. So it's up to uh, the group itself to be conducting itself a certain way. And usually people look to a leader, and that person becomes a dominant voice. Okay. So either it's going to be a talkative person or it's going to be a person who refuses to listen to other people. And this is going to overshadow alternative viewpoints, right? If the person is speaking so confidently, right, then anyone who has a different opinion than him might be a bit too scared to speak up, right? So that's one viewpoint gone, right? The point of focus group is that everyone gets to speak, but people will shy away if there's a dominant voice, okay? There's also a risk of groupthink, okay, or hive mind, whatever you want to call it, where everyone conforms to the same opinion, okay? They might not start off with the same opinion, but for example, if there's a dominant voice, right, they say their opinion, one or two people agree, a few more people see that these people are agreeing, so they also, okay, yeah. And then before you know it, everyone is like, okay, yeah, sure. I guess that's the right way. Even though internally they don't really think that, right? What you get as a moderator is that, okay, everyone thinks this, okay? All because they're in a group setting. And then again, time constraints. Whenever you're dealing directly with stakeholders, time is always a problem. Okay. Even though focus groups tackle multiple stakeholders at once compared to an interview, it still has time constraints because you're getting so many people. Are they even free at all? Right? Are they all free at the same time? And then how long can they be free for, right? Because there's so many people, you want to give time for everyone to give their opinion. You also want to go as detailed as possible while everyone is still here. You don't want to keep arranging more and more meetings, right? So time constraints can limit how productive the discussions are going to be. Okay. And of course, there can be disagreements, right? Uh, of course, it depends on the type of system, but some people can get very heated when their opinion is not accepted, right? And people can start arguing. That's why you need a moderator. Okay. Next, we have surveys and questionnaires. Okay. The nice thing about surveys and questionnaires is it's scalable, right? You send it out to maybe a group of 10 people, right? You have a group of friends who fit the criteria, you share it in that group, you ask them to share it around, and each of them shares it to 5 more people, right? So you shared it to 10 people, now you have an additional 50 responses, right? That's 60 people. If those people share it and just keep sharing it, and that's how it grows, okay? It's also anonymous. So, like how over here, there's the risk of groupthink and overshadowed voices because they don't want to go against someone, right? There's also fear of disagreements and all this. In a survey, everyone can be anonymous, so they're more confident in their opinion. They'll be more honest about what their expectations are. Okay, and surveys is where you get your quantitative data, so you can make trends, look at trends, you can make statistical analysis. Okay. You can like divide by age groups, see that, okay, this age group says this age group thinks this, and so on, and make your decisions based on that. Okay. It's also cost effective, right? If you're doing a printed survey, then your only cost is printing the paper. But if you're doing an online survey, what's the cost? Nothing, right? Just the time to write up the questions and share it around. Okay. It's generally free. Maybe if you're paying for a service like MailChimp and all those, if you're actually getting the paid version, that's your cost. But otherwise, generally, Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, those are enough. Okay. Problem with surveys is there's limited depth. Okay. You can ask a question and then you can put a why question after that, right? Do you think this is this? And then they say yes or no, maybe. And then you ask why, right? But you can't really go in detail, right? That's the most detail you can get compared to an interview where you can target specific points that they made and then go deeper into that, right? In a survey, you don't know what people are going to say, so you can't plan your questions that detailed ahead of time. That's why you need a balance of both surveys and interviews, okay? There's also the risk of low rate response, right? The case where I mentioned for scalable, you share it with 10 friends, they share it with 5 friends, you get 60 responses so easily, right? There's a possibility not even all your 10 friends fill up the survey, right? You never know. So there is that risk of people not filling your survey, okay? When I was doing my final year project, my target was 100 people, okay? Shared it around, but because I was targeting school teachers specifically, okay, not even students, I only got, I think, around 30, but according to the lecturer, 20 was the minimum, so good enough for me, okay? But it's just a final year project for me. If you're developing for a client, you need all those responses, okay? You can't rely on 20, 30 responses to make a good system. Lack of context may lead to ambiguous or incomplete responses. Okay, this is connected to the limited depth. Okay, because you can't ask a detailed question, you won't get detailed answers. Okay, so there might be things that don't have any context and you need clarification on that, but you can't. Okay, again, also the surveys are anonymous, so you can't really contact the people to ask them, what did you mean by this? Okay. Poorly designed questions can lead to misunderstandings. You need to properly research what kind of questions to ask and how those questions might be interpreted. Okay, it's always good to have other people look at your questions before you release them to the public, so that you know that you're not assuming people will understand. Okay, And then the final slide for requirement elicitation, okay, we have observations, okay? Observations give you first-hand insights. You get to see exactly how things work uh, for the context that you're going to develop the system for, right? It gives you contextual understanding. If, for example, uh, well, you wouldn't conduct an interview before observation, but let's say you did conduct an interview, right? Or okay, maybe you did a survey before the interview and you saw a lot of responses that said a specific thing, right? Maybe they wanted a specific feature and you don't understand why would teachers want this feature. For example, teachers, okay? I'm going to keep going to the school management system example. What you can do is go to the school and see how things are done by yourself, okay? And notice what are the problems that people are facing. That will make you, that will give you context as to why people responded a certain way, okay? Uh, yeah, but usually you wouldn't do a survey before an observation. You would observe first so that you have an idea of how things work so that you can prepare questions that will make sense for people to respond to, okay? Uh, The problem with observation is it might be intrusive, right? For example, you have to ask permission to go to the school, and then when you do get to the school, you're going to follow people around, see how they do things, right? So it is going to be awkward, right? They're not supposed to be talking to you, they just do their work, and then occasionally you ask them a question. But it's still awkward having a guy follow you around all day while you're doing your work, okay? There's also observer bias. Just like how you have interviewer bias where you assume things, there's also observer bias, right? Oh, it's the system that's at fault. Why do I have to develop a website that fixes this issue if they should be changing the system in the first place, right? There is a limit, there is a degree of bias that comes from you. Again, limited scope, how long you have to arrange a day. You have to dedicate your entire day to following people around. There is a time constraint in that aspect as well. Okay. And then there are also ethical considerations. Okay. This doesn't apply to every that, but certain, for example, if you're developing a system for a hospital, right? A system that doctors are going to use, is it ethical for you to sit in meetings where a doctor talks to his patients? What do you think? Since we're doing ethics, is it ethical for you as a system developer to sit in a room where a doctor is meeting his patient? Okay, you're developing the system for the doctor when he'll be meeting patients. Okay, so this will give you a lot of uh, valuable insight into how things work. But is it ethical for you to be there? Okay, the answer is, well, the thing about ethics is that there's no fixed answer, right? You're supposed to discuss. But I think the way that society generally leans, you can tell this from the laws as well, is it's not ethical, right? Uh, Medical information is confidential information. Okay. If you call a clinic and you say that I'm the patient's brother, sister, mother, and so on, okay? And they couldn't come to the clinic today, so I'm calling on their behalf. Can you tell me the results? The clinic won't share it with you, okay? Because it's not ethical, okay? Also because the laws prohibit it, but mainly because it's not ethical, okay? So ethical considerations as well. Okay, this one is more context specific, right? It's not always a problem. And then finally, literature review. Okay. Literature review, because there's already so many books and well, it depends on the context, but because internet is so full of things, right? A lot of them free, a lot of them paid. There's a wide range of existing knowledge, right? Why do you have to collect information on your own if someone else has already done it. Okay? This is called secondary research. You're using research that has already been done to come to your own conclusions. Okay? This is time efficient because you're not relying on other people's time, right? You don't have to discuss with your stakeholders that is this a good time for me to come visit you? Is this a good time for an interview, right? You just do it whenever you're available, right? Because you're the only person doing it. So it's more time efficient, and every decision that you make, you will have evidence for it, right? Because the research has been conducted already. You're not making decisions out of thin air. Okay, and it can either validate assumptions you've made, again, because whenever you're developing a system, you start off with assumptions, right? So when you do literature review, you can find out whether you were correct or whether you need to change your approach, okay, based on how previous people have done it. Problem is, it's challenging to find relevant literature, okay? Again, you might be developing a completely new system that has never been done before, or a system that's too specific to the stakeholders that you're making it for. Okay, so it is hard to find relevant literature. Uh, you also need to filter unreliable sources or low quality sources. Okay, so there are websites that, uh, like science journals and articles and all these, those are the more reliable sources. Blogs, probably not, right? And then it is also a problem when a lot of the literature that you find is outdated literature. Okay. Uh, when I was doing research, a lot of the things that I found were from 2000, like 2010 and before, right? Usually, when you're doing literature review, it's recommended that your literature is within the past 5 years. Okay. So if you use outdated literature, it will lead to discrepancies in current practices, right? The way people do things changes over time, especially in IT, right? And software engineering and all that. So you want to avoid outdated literature as much as possible. Okay. Also, it gives you a limited perspective. You're the only one reviewing this literature, and already it's hard to find relevant literature. So there's a limit to how broad you can make it. Okay, so you've collected your requirements, right? You've done the requirement elicitation. Now you're going to analyze those requirements. Okay, the data that you gathered needs to be processed for it to be useful for you. Okay, so requirement analysis is what you do to identify and improve the quality of requirements, right? You've collected all the information. Now, based on that information, you're going to come up with a list of requirements. Okay. Uh, Requirement analysis also makes sure that you haven't overlooked any stakeholders, right? You look at all the interviews you conducted, you look at all the focus groups, the surveys, and make sure you have as wide a range as possible. Okay. It also lets you examine for ambiguities, conflicts, and inconsistencies, right? People in the uh, people in the survey said that they want this feature, but people in the focus group were talking about how that's unnecessary and a waste of time, right? So it lets you identify such things, right? And then maybe you have to arrange another interview or create another survey to find out more. Okay, so there's different types of analysis that you can do for your requirements. The first one is feasibility analysis. Okay, in feasibility analysis, you check whether the requirements that you identified can be implemented in within the constraints that you have, right? It could be budget, it could be time, it could be resources, right? Is it feasible? Is it possible or practical for you to be implementing these requirements? Okay, time, budget, technology, manpower, legal constraint, market viability, right? Uh, there was one time I was working on a project for real estate, okay, selling real estate. Okay. Uh, when I asked where the information is going to come from, right? Does the company own real estate that we're going to put on the website? They said, no, we're going to look at other real estate websites and do web scraping and list it on our website. Okay. Do you guys see any problem with that? Web scraping other websites and listing the uh, products there on your website. Is there any problem with that? If you are, let's say, selling houses on your website, but the houses don't belong to you, you uh, scrape other websites and list them on your website, and then when people click buy, it links back to the original website. So you're just listing things, but to do so, you're scraping other websites. You're automatically visiting other websites and taking their information, putting it on your website. It does sound like theft, doesn't it? Okay, because people have developed a website and then uh, you're not even getting permission for it. It would be one thing for companies to be able to register for your website so that their houses are listed on yours, right? And it doesn't matter that you're linking back to the original. You're still scraping their website, which means they think they're getting visitors, but they're not actually getting visitors. It's you just collecting information, right? So of course that system never really took off. It never ended up being developed. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then you have a completeness analysis. Okay. Making sure that all the requirements have been identified, nothing has been overlooked. Okay. So how do you do this? You make use case diagrams. We're going to look at that in a short while. Oh, with 5 minutes. Okay. Uh, to see how users will interact with the system. Okay. Then you have a consistency analysis where you verify that your requirements don't conflict with one another, okay? And everything is coherent, okay? You look at all the different requirements that you've collected and identify inconsistencies. This can also be done in conjunction with the completeness analysis where you use use case diagrams, right? To see if there's any conflicts. Okay, and then finally you have requirement specification. Okay, understand the audience. Who are you going to show this list to? Okay, and how much technical knowledge do they have of the system? Okay, uh, then gather and analyze your requirements. Okay, uh, so we discussed these two just now. And then organize your requirements. Okay, structure your document. Oh, spelling error. Okay, structure your document and all the requirements that are similar to one another or related to one another, group them. Okay, and then create document. Okay, uh, okay. So what do the documents look like? Okay, you can either describe it with normal words. Okay, plain everyday like you're talking to someone. Okay, the nice thing about this is that it's easy to understand. Everyone already speaks the language, and you don't need technical knowledge. Okay. For example, do you guys understand what this diagram is? I'm not sure if we covered it in level 3, but if you look at this, would you be able to tell me what it's for and what all these arrows mean? Okay. If it's your first time seeing it, probably not. Okay. So natural language wouldn't have that problem. Okay. There's no technical knowledge required. But the problem with natural language is it can be ambiguous, it can be misinterpreted, right? it's up to interpretation. What do I mean, right? And sometimes people assume they understand when the meaning that they took is completely different in reality. Okay, so you could use natural language or you can use diagrams. For example, UML diagrams, okay? Unified Modeling Language diagrams. This is a UML diagram, okay? It's a visual representation of use cases, okay? You have use case diagrams, you have activity diagrams, sequence diagrams, class diagrams, all describing different properties of the system, okay? So it gives you an overview of how the system will behave, how the system will be structured. Of course, you need to know how to interpret the diagram, okay? And then there's also formal notation, for example, RQIF. Uh, this one is very technical. Okay, let me show you a picture of REQIF. If I recall correctly, it's a lot of symbols, okay? Can't seem to find it. I should have added a picture to the slides, okay? But the most popular way is using UML diagrams, okay? Because you convey so much information with just a single image, okay? So just for your understanding, this is a class diagram, okay? So for example, in my system, okay, we have no idea what this system is for, but let's see what it's for. In your system, there will be users. Users have user ratings, articles, fans, roles, and rules, okay? The users can submit articles. An article has a score, reviews, who has submitted it, when it was submitted, ratings, and status, okay? An article has ratings. Ratings contain which article is for, which user gave the rating, how much was the rating, when was it rated, okay? Article also has reviews, okay? Which article is it reviewing? Who is reviewing the article? When was it reviewed? What's the title of the review? And what's the content of the review? So this looks like it's a system for a website where you can submit articles. Users can submit articles, and then other viewers can review those articles and give ratings, right? So one diagram, now I know all the properties that each user will have, right? What the user will have, what the article has, what the review has, and how they're linked to one another, right? So each article is submitted by one user, but a user can submit 0 or more articles, right? Each rating is created by one user, but one user can submit 0 or more ratings, okay? And so on, okay? So any questions? Jake, no questions? Saifuddin, all good? Looks like Bowie is gone. No questions. Okay. Uh, yeah, okay. Maybe we can discuss a time change another time. Okay. A couple of weeks from now, I won't be available. So, I have two classes to reschedule. I'm thinking of rescheduling them to a Monday. Okay, so let me bring up my calendar just so I know exact dates. So on the 23rd, I won't be available on the 23rd. So the class for that day, is it okay if we reschedule it to Monday, this coming Monday, the 12th? Okay, 12th? Yeah, 12th. Okay. So it's not finalized yet. I'll discuss with the college itself, and if it's confirmed, then I'll update you guys in the group. Okay. All right. So if that is all, thank you everyone for coming, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good night.